Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Testing applications in Kubernetes doesn't have to be complicated. TestCube is your go-to platform for cloud-native continuous testing. With TestCube, you can orchestrate, scale, and automate tests effortlessly right within Kubernetes, catching issues early and deploying with confidence. Try it out today and see why engineering teams trust TestCube to keep their testing simple and scalable. Your test, your tools, your infrastructure, finally together. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective, albeit this one is going out just a little bit late. This one's on a Monday. We are rolling up on the end of October. Hope everybody's doing well, and apologize for this one. I am finishing up, what did I count up? 43 days of travel in the last 2.5 months. So haven't been home a whole lot. The travel yesterday went a lot longer than I expected. I was expecting to get the show recorded yesterday on a Sunday, as I typically do, or Saturday. Just didn't happen. And I apologize for that. So anyways, I'm going to try and get this one out. It's not going to be real long because we're going to have another one that'll come out on Wednesday. So many of you might be getting a Tuesday and a Wednesday show if you're picking this up late. I'm going to publish it on Monday, but it'll probably be later in the day on Monday. So again, apologize for that. Want to dig into kind of an interesting conversation that I saw from one of the large well-known VCs, and I'll put the details in the show notes and get a link to it in there. But basically, again, going back to sort of the premise of these weekend perspectives, try and connect the dots at least between a couple things and try and figure out maybe why certain things are happening. We talked about a couple of times in the show, and I know like on the weekend wrap up and some of the cloud news of the month shows, there's a study that's been floating around that is a survey from MIT in which they said, we did a survey of 500 plus companies, larger companies, and 95% of them are not seeing an ROI from their AI projects, which obviously got a lot of attention, got a lot of noise and news about that, and got to thinking about, well, why is that the case, right? Like, it's one thing just to say okay, it's not happening. Why is that the case? There was a good interview that happened this week, again, with one of the prominent VCs, kind of talking about, why some of the early AI startups, though, have been successful at rolling out their projects and are doing relatively well. And I thought it'd be interesting to try and connect the dots. And again, a lot of times in these early days, we're comparing things back to some of the last technology trend that we saw with cloud. And again, they're not exactly the same thing, but a lot of times the patterns of new adoption are oftentimes have similarities to them, or at least they rhyme a little bit. So I want to dive into those similarities right after the break.
Global finance is being reshaped, and it is powered by digital infrastructure that never sleeps. On Interconnected, a new podcast by Equinix that explores the hidden infrastructure behind our connected future, they lay out the trends that make tomorrow's banking system possible. Project Liberty Institute CEO Sheila Warren, Wormhole Foundation co-founder Dan Reeser, and Gauntlet CTO and co-founder Ri Chiang explore the ongoing progress of decentralized finance. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dive into a little bit of just maybe connecting the dots, or at least connecting a dot or a couple of dots. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of kind of buzz, whether it's good or bad, around the industry, because there's an article that came out, or a survey or a report that came out from MIT a couple of weeks ago. And, went into a whole bunch of stuff, but basically they did some survey work, kind of trying to understand the early impacts of the first couple of years of generative AI and whether or not AI is as transformative and impactful as, as the media is sort of portraying it, and maybe not even the media, just, some of these founders of large companies and sort of the industry in general, talking about, what an amazing thing it's going to do, how it's going to change everything. And so MIT went out and said, well, let's go query businesses and see if this really is having a big impact. And the headline of it, and I'll put a link in the show notes, the headline of it essentially was, 95% of AI projects within companies aren't providing an ROI that's either acceptable or any ROI whatsoever. And again, a lot of that is kind of big blustery headlines to grab the news. But it did sort of point out a thing, and obviously it resonates those that are more on the negative side of AI than maybe the positive side of AI. But I got to thinking about it, and it was like, okay, why is that the case? Because there is a way of getting started with AI that's fairly easy. I talked about this a little bit in some of the 5, 10, 85. I think I called it 5, 15, 85 or 5, 10, 85 show that I did a couple of weeks ago, talking about this. And really, it's if you want to get started with AI, and if you want to say, hey, we've applied AI to our company, the easiest way to go about doing that is just you write a big check to Microsoft or Google or any of a number of companies. Those two are probably the easiest, and just say, hey, give me some Copilot, give me some Gemini, give me some ChatGPT. Let me apply it to X number of seats. You don't even have to, get into the agent stuff that a Salesforce or a ServiceNow or anybody else is doing, where you actually have to sort of map out actual process flows. You can just go, here you go, folks. Everybody gets the chatbot. Everybody gets the development coding assistant. If you really want to, you probably can apply it to, a call center or something along those lines. And you've rolled out, AI to huge swaths of your organization. And that's a possibility, especially if you've got a lot of folks that are knowledge workers, white collar workers, folks that do interactions with data and words and all those sort of things. But if you start to get into, the conversation of like, hey, we want to, augment a process that we have. We want to take a bunch of knowledge from a number of really smart people in our organization and be able to spread that either better to our customers or better to people within the organization. Had a really good conversation with a business owner, business lead. This past week I was on the road, and he said, "Look, I have a pretty straightforward use case. At least it seems pretty straightforward to me." He said, "Look, I have a number of subject matter experts on my team. They've been around for 15, 20 years at the company. I don't know how much longer they're going to be at the company. Maybe they'll be another 10 years or another 15 years. But, they had amassed a great amount of knowledge. And a lot of it was, knowledge of their products and what their technologies did and all those sort of things. But they also had amassed quite a bit of context knowledge about, kind of how do, here's a situation, here's the nuances of a situation. It's got 5 or 6 different inputs, and depending on which lever you pull and push more or less, you're going to get different outcomes. And ultimately, what he was sort of looking for is he said, "Hey, I want to not only free up some of their time from having to answer the same repetitive questions over and over again, I want to allow them to also focus on some higher value type of work. The stuff they do is high value, but a lot of times they get bogged down, doing paperwork or answering basic questions over and over again, or, having to, teach younger level people." He's like, how do I sort of take from them and start to put that into something that other people can utilize, not to replace them, because they're kind of unreplaceable or unicorns in their organization, but, how do you scale them? How do you make sure that their knowledge doesn't leave in 20 years when they decide to leave, or in 5 years if they decide to retire, or whatever that might be. And it was an interesting conversation because, as we were digging into it, it was sort of like, well, God, how would you go about doing that, right? Because a lot of what they had done maybe hadn't necessarily been digitized, right? It was in their head. It was in a million different places, right? Like you probably could start to get to it through a lot of different ways, but you'd have to be like, well, I'm going to have to listen into your phone calls. I'm going to have to tap into your email. I'm going to have to look at all the documents you work on. I'm going to have to look at whatever tracking system you use for your projects or for your customer engagement or whatever it might be. And, it was sort of this like, well, I mean, I guess that's a way you could go about doing it, but that seems really intrusive to the people that are working on it. And, I don't want this to be treated like it's a, what do they call it when you sue somebody and they do disclosure, right? Where you go in and sort of search through everybody's stuff, looking for all kinds of things. And sometimes you find the answers you're looking for. And sometimes you find, stuff that you didn't necessarily want to find out, right? Whatever it might be, just conversations they were having with coworkers or whatever those things might be. And it was an interesting conversation, not because the use case was sort of unique, but because it sort of highlighted like, okay, how would you go about doing this, right? And what it also sort of highlighted was, and this was a company that had, a reasonably good IT team and a reasonably good IT staff, and they had kept up with technology, and he was attending an event and sort of, digging into new stuff, and he knew, a number of things, and he just said like, I don't know how I would go about doing this, and I don't think I have the staff to do it, and I don't know what it would cost to go about doing this. And And what his point was sort of highlighting was like, I have pretty common sort of things I'd like to do. Like, I'm not looking to cure cancer. I'm not looking to create a video, kind of a useless video for political reasons or propaganda or anything. I'm just trying to solve like business problems. And he's like, how do I do this? And I think what it sort of highlighted to me is what I think is part of the thing with, why some of these projects are struggling is that just those core skills, those core tools, those how do you go about doing it, that what's the blueprint for doing this for a company isn't necessarily readily available, right? Like there's lots of like individual, like how would an individual go and build a Gemini gem or a custom GPT or maybe begin to build an agent or something along those lines. But to do it sort of at scale and to get into a bunch of, where's the information coming from? How do I train it on the things I want to train it on? And all this is hard, right? And the reason I kind of, and I could have gone, okay, well, that's just a thing. I wouldn't be passing anything useful along to any of you. But then I was reading an article. I was in a publication called The Information, which I subscribe to. It's a couple $100 a month. Actually, very useful if you're, covering this AI space. You're trying to dive into it some more. You want to keep up with kind of what's going on. It was an interview with a gentleman named Vinod Khosla, who is, for those of you that don't know him, sort of very, very famous in our industry. Was one of the founders of Sun Microsystems. Obviously, one of the kind of the OG internet companies, has gone on to become a very, very well-known thought leader around the internet, but also a very well-known venture capitalist and investor in the space, and somebody who, is a pretty rational thinker about a lot of things. And so he had sort of a nice interview in the in this publication, and the person sort of asked them like, we're seeing some struggles with adoption and within businesses, and we're seeing some struggles with, trying to make it actually financially viable. Like, what do you think some of the problems are? And, without going into all sort of detail, he said, look, at the most basic level, many of these companies don't have those skills in-house, and it takes them a while to pick them up in-house. And, so it's not unusual to expect that they're going to struggle with it. And he said, quite honestly, like if I was going to give them any guidance, besides, pushing whatever, whatever startups you might have been, investing in, he said, spend the money, find people who have done this stuff before, right? Use consulting services, use experts, even if they're big consultants or small consultants, pick a project or two and go focus on that until it becomes successful, until you've learned what's necessary to do that, and that you've figured out a way to do sort of knowledge transfer and technology transfer from what they're doing. And again, it was one of those moments where sometimes you go like, oh, okay, well that makes a lot of sense. It feels a little bit contrary to kind of when cloud got started, because when cloud got started, it was all about builders, and it was all about like, hey, we're getting you away from IT, and we're just giving you the tools you want, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I think about some of the transitions I've lived through, and the companies that are the most successful are oftentimes the ones who go, we've identified two things. One is we sort of think we have a known problem. So they've identified a problem. They're not just generally saying like, hey, give everybody the chatbot and they'll figure it out. They've gone, hey, we've got some known business problems. We think we've sort of scoped out what we'd love to see as an outcome from improving these problems. And number two, they go, I'm going to be the first to admit, I don't necessarily know how to do this. And so I'm looking for people that can, be a partner to me, be excellent at helping me do this, bring some expertise, be further along the learning curve than we are. And, and help make that one thing successful. And then secondarily, make sure that this doesn't become sort of a dependency, right? Like, oh, I'm only able to be successful because you guys are holding our hands and because you did all the work. And, and it sort of dawned on me, it's like, it feels like, it's a great, simple, prescriptive way of being like, that's how you get the first couple of projects successful. And we know from having seen transitions before, the successful project is a number of things. Number one, it means finding somebody who's going to be the champion within your organization for this, because it's probably going to cost you, more than you expect it's going to cost, right? So you're going to need a champion who's got decent political cover. Number two, you need somebody who, can paint a vision for what's possible right? Of here's why we're doing this. Here's where we think we can go with this. Get a lot of people excited about it. Number three, you need people who can, deal with the fact that you're probably going to make mistakes and you're probably not going to meet all your deadlines and it's going to underperform where you thought it was going to be at first. But as long as you have a learning culture within what you do, you can build upon it, sort of step by step, build upon it, iterate, continue to make it better. But it takes a huge leap, especially in the early days, to have people who are willing to say, hey, I don't necessarily know how to get there, and I would like somebody to help me. Because a lot of times in the early days, you've got some eager people who go out there trying to make a name for themselves. They're trying to get promoted. They're trying to find some budget that wasn't necessarily in their group. And they go, well, if I can get all those things, we can do it. I can do it. I can drive it. And so often, again, what happens, and I've seen this in a number of transitional phases through technology, is the companies who are willing to admit they need help typically are 3x to 4x further along a year from the project starting than the company who goes, I've got the exact same technology as you and I've got the same budget as you, but we're going to do it all in-house and we can figure it out ourselves. They're usually about, they've made very little progress compared to the companies who go and do this. And I say all this not as an advertisement for any sort of like consultant in doing this, right? I'm not trying to pitch anybody. You won't hear any ads on the show about like, hey, go to XYZ Consulting. But I did think, listening to it and reading through his sort of feedback, it was like, yeah, this stuff is very hard. And it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world to find somebody who necessarily, can help do this. But, just the basic concept of like, this stuff is really hard. It will be very different than anything you've done before because it's going to involve new technology, a new process, and new internal politics, and new ways of communicating and telling a story around it. That any way that you can find people that have done it before, even if they've done it only one more time than you have, or, are 5 minutes smarter than you are on these things, oftentimes that can be a huge force multiplier. And I can't recommend it enough. And again, I'm not trying to pitch you on some consulting company. I'm not backing some consulting company. I'm just saying, as I connect the dots between this thing of the 95% aren't making their ROI and sort of going like, well, what would make those things successful? And sort of thinking about the transitions again, it's like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So anyways, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm not going to dive into a lot of it, but just connecting a couple dots between this new sort of spook that the industry has about like, oh man, none of this stuff works itself out. And again, trust me, hiring one consulting group or one systems integration group to help you isn't going to magically like make all the economics of AI work in your favor, right? Chips are still way too expensive. They're still too hard to get. We're still not sure if you should use a monolithic model or a smaller model. We're still not exactly sure, the best way to, train things specifically around the data that you want. And we're not exactly sure what the best user experience is for developer assistance and all those sort of things. And all that stuff's sort of got to work itself out. And over time, it'll get better. And the economics of all this will get better. But, if ultimately you're trying to drive success for a known project, something that you think you've got scoped and you want to go after, pulling in some resources to help you get there can be very advantageous. And it was a good reminder from Mr. Kozlov to sort of go, yeah, sometimes you kind of should just get back to the basics and be like, what are the things that would be necessary to help me succeed? And I think it's very good guidance. So I'll pass that along today. So again, apologize for the show being late. Hopefully it didn't screw up your listening schedule too much. We will be back on Wednesday with our normal show, back on Sunday because I am done traveling. And then we'll get back to our regular schedule for the rest of the year. So anyways, with that, thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for sticking with us when the schedule gets a little bit wonky like it has the last few weeks. And we promise to get it back to normal as soon as possible. So with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.